Welcome to HCA Talks Health. I'm Zina Leroux, and with me today is Victoria Boxall-Hunt. Victoria is Chief People Office and Group Operations Director for an international family office, and she's also a certified health coach, speaker, and wellbeing consultant, as well as an HCA ambassador. So it's really lovely to have you on the show today, Victoria. A warm welcome to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Zena. It's lovely to be here.
Victoria, you've lived an incredibly powerful story. Can you take us through the journey that you've been on in the past few decades and please share with our listeners what you've experienced?
It really, it's yes. I find myself standing here at 54, so that's quite quite a long few decades to share with you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I did a CCS recently, and the wonderful Mary Walker asked on the back of a conversation with her whether I'd be interested in doing that, which, while it was very confronting, it was also a very cathartic experience, and it's the first time ever really that I've actually spent time really thinking about my journey and what's brought me to HCA and doing what I'm doing now. So I think while it starts with weight loss, and I think that is a journey in itself, it's become apparent to me that it's been a lot more than that. But I was 18 and a half, nearly 19 stone, which is about 120 kilos. And now I find myself, as of my scale this morning, at about 63 kilos. So nearly half my body weight. But in reality, it's been, you know, more than that, because it's never a straight line. It's never a linear process. It's always a little bit here, a little bit there, and add a bit more and take a bit more off. And I think it's been a journey to where I find myself today. So I think when I was examining it as far as, or thinking about it as far as doing my CCS, I think for the first time in ever, I looked back at it and thought, well, why has that journey been the way that it's been? And I think a lot of it comes from my childhood, and I grew up in a very, very happy home. But I think at sort of 16, I have never been formally diagnosed, but I know now that I have dyslexia. And I think that for me, it was very, very difficult at school. I never felt like I was keeping up and I was good enough and I was capable enough. And I think in reality, that's probably a big part of where my journey with food comes from.
Mm.
And I think the food became a comfort. It became an escape. It became something that was, reasonably socially acceptable, and it gave me something that was missing, in a weird and wonderful way. So I think that's probably where that journey begins. And I gained, I was a little bit overweight as a sort of young teenager, and then a little bit more overweight as I left school, and then I went to America when I was nearly 18, and I was there for 18 months, coming up for just over 20 months or something, away from sort of prying eyes and on my own. And over that period of time, I gained a lot of weight. And as much as I knew I'd gained weight, I didn't really realize how much I'd gained until I came back, and I was then, the mirror of seeing people's reactions to how I had grown. Really was a difficult place and very confronting.
Mm.
And then I think it really became this sort of yo-yo, right? Okay, I'm going to go super extreme, and I'm going to, go to the gym for however many hours of the day I can fit in, and I'm going to stop eating altogether, and I'm going to try these crazy diets and pills and potions and whatever else. and I'd lose weight. And then, there would be something that would mean I'd plateau, and then something else that would happen, which would mean, I'd go back to eating again, and I'd gain it back again. And then, you'd go through varying different cycles, and it goes on for a really, really long time. And I think, anybody that's experienced living with obesity or with, being kind of heavier, there is always this sort of voice in your head, or this, when this happens, and when I get to this, and for that holiday, or for that wedding, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And there's always a kind of sort of negative tone to whatever it is you're doing, because of how you feel about yourself.
Mm.
So I think, the journey has taken you through, 40 years, um, and try and give you, I guess a little bit of a flavor of it. But it would be, the cycles of dieting. Sometimes it would be, very successful, and I'd feel on top of the world, and I'd feel like I was really, really, I'd broken it this time, I'd got it this time, this was it. And then something would happen. And sometimes it's not necessarily food related or gym related, but it's life related, a job change, or a country change, or a relationship breakup, or a sick parent, or a sick grandparent. And I was living away from home, living on the other side of the world, and that would be a trigger for more food, or, and I think probably booze at some stages as well. Have been difficult for me. They've been methods that I've used to cope. And the weight, and it's the toxicity. I think, you build up the inflammation and the toxicity in your system. And then you feel rubbish, and you go into those darker places mentally. And food, was the thing that gave me that little bit of comfort on those not so bright days.
Yeah. But I'm sure you've learned a lot of lessons throughout this journey. And you've mentioned earlier that yes, you did lose a lot of weight, but it's so much more than just the weight, if I understand correctly. Can you talk us through maybe some of these lessons that you've learned, and maybe some of the deeper layers when it comes to emotional growth and mental and spiritual journey that you've been on in the last few years?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, yeah, where do you start with that? I mean, I think what I now, knowing what I know and being where I am, in some weird and wonderful way, I'm actually very grateful for the journey that I've been on and what I've learned. And I think particularly, some of the feedback that I've had from sharing my story, and the ability to be able to relate to others by sharing it, because it does feel incredibly vulnerable. You sort of feel a little bit like you're standing up there naked saying, these are all the mistakes I've ever made. And I'm sure I've got plenty more to come. Not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that I have it figured out. But I think, that sense of life happens, doesn't it? And I love the Viktor Frankl quote about, that ability to be able to find some space between stimulus and response. And it's wonderful now, with a little bit more understanding, education, and life experience, to be looking back on where I've come from.
Mm.
And I think, there's a light and dark to everything, and there's been some amazing life lessons in there. I wouldn't necessarily want others to repeat those life lessons, but I think they are all, they make up who I am today, as, a mother and a sister and a wife and a friend and a colleague. And, that all, I think, is the rich tapestry of life. So I think, from a spiritual perspective, I think what came up for me when you use that word was very much around my mum. And I think it was really, I was very close to my mum. She was diagnosed with leukemia. Um, she died 5 years ago in August, so she was diagnosed about 15 years ago now.
Mm.
And for me, or 14 years ago, for me at that time, I was very, I was in a very busy job. I had two small children. I was, you know, trying to do everything for everyone, be the mum I thought I should be, and the colleague I thought I should be, and the wife I thought I should be, and doing the PTA and mentoring women, and I
Yeah.
was doing all sorts of things, but really, I had very little resource left in me. I was about as close to burnout as I think I could be.
Mm.
Um, and I was at about 110 kilos again. I'd probably gone back up, had two children and gained weight with the first one and then gained a bit more weight with the second one. And, we've seen there's a familiar pattern there, I think. And really just, going back to work after having the second one and just thinking, how the heck do you fit two full-time jobs into the same 24-hour period, and feeling down on myself and just not knowing really how to fit it all in, looking around and seeing other people doing it and thinking, well, if they can do it, surely I can do it. I'm capable. I can do this. But really, really struggling with the ability to be able to fit it all in, and not feeling like I was doing anything particularly well. And then when my mum was diagnosed, it was one of those moments in time where, she had four daughters in their 30s and early 40s, and her life had been about being a mum, and she really, really wanted to be a granny. And so many of her friends had their grandchildren, and she was, she didn't put any pressure on us, but we all felt she really wanted to be a granny. And so at the point where she was diagnosed, she just had her first grandchildren.
Yeah.
Um, and I just remember just feeling genuinely, genuinely heartbroken for her, in that she cry now, that she'd looked forward to this part of her life for such a long time, and it just felt hugely, hugely unfair. And she was so just incredible about her diagnosis. And while obviously deeply saddened by it, was really stoic. And this, like, life throws us curveballs, and we're all here to, I've got so much to be grateful for. I've got four amazing children that I'm close to. I've got my grandkids. But I think in some ways her diagnosis took me out of my head
Mm.
and made me realize just how incredibly short life is.
Yeah.
And the focus on being thin sort of dissipated. It didn't matter. And actually what mattered was health, and being there for her and being there for my kids, and not wanting my kids to see me in this kind of turbulent kind of mental state, and wanting my children to also have a relationship with their granny for as long as they could. And at the stage that she was diagnosed, we had no idea of how long she'd live. And I think something like that, or certainly for me, something like that brought such clarity of not sweating the small stuff, and thinking about health in a very, very different way, it not being a number on the scale, but it being about how you live your life. Um, so it was from that perspective, I think the spiritual piece came from a lot of the conversations that we had as a family, and we've always been, I think, quite open, with an ability to be able to kind of talk about the difficult things. But this took that to a whole different level. My father, you know, he was very outnumbered with his four daughters and mum.
Yeah.
But mum gave us incredible access to being able to talk about love and be able to talk about our feelings and those sorts of things.
Mm.
And in having those very honest conversations around life and legacy, and absolutely not necessarily embracing the end, but when the end is almost in view, it changes the context of the conversations because there is an end.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, there is obviously in the longevity space, there's this huge, discussion going on at the moment with regard to living to 150 and living to 160 and all of these sorts of things. And I think in some ways, we want to be thinking about how we live our next few years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but how we live them well and
Yeah.
how we live them in the healthiest possible way. And, not so much around what supplements you're taking and how you're doing this and how you're doing that, but the real core elements of what health is. And
Mm.
community is so much a part of that, and family is so much a part of that.
Mm.
Um, so I think, that spiritual piece really did come from those meaningful conversations. It came from um, really thinking about what is next. What is, are we here as a soul having a physical experience? What does that really mean? It went really deep. And we read a lot when mum was very ill or going through treatment and feeling awful. We'd read because though, at times it was difficult for her to talk, but, we might read different books or some poetry or even, something the kids had written or whatever it might have been. But it led to, yeah, really deep and heartfelt conversations.
Mm. I mean, we don't wish something like this upon anyone, right? It
Yeah.
is extremely painful to see someone suffer in that way. That's really close to you. But what I find interesting here is that it really helped you to make that shift, to realize that, there's more important things in life. It's kind of a reminder. It was a reminder of I actually want to focus on other things. The number on the scale, sure, that's one thing, but I want to be healthy. I want to show up for my kids in a different way. I want to be there for my mom. So there was
Mhm.
was a very clearly defined why
Oh
you
my goodness.
focus
Yeah,
on health. Okay. Mm.
completely. And, I think it was also, there was an element of wanting to keep her going for as long as possible, and, really looking at what that meant too. So looking at things from a nutrition perspective, that would suit her and support her and help her through her treatment. So, there were some very practical things that came. I think it also, in some senses, cleared the decks of the things that you think you should do but don't necessarily want to do. But, you might be invited somewhere and, you think, oh, I really should go. Whereas when mum was ill, it was very clear to me that I was not going to be spending time doing things unless I absolutely had a really important reason to do them. So I think, there's a clarity in some senses that came with that grief and the restricted time frame that we would have. And not only, I guess, in it was never just me and my sisters and my father could do for our mum, but in turn, what could I do for myself to make sure that I had the energy to be able to go and look after her on the weekends after working in the week, or, whatever it might be, use my holiday time and my downtime in a way that was really meaningful to the things that were important to me. So I think that the clarity that comes with something like that for me was made my life easier. My world in some senses got a bit smaller, but it certainly got richer and deeper because of the meaning behind a lot of what I was doing.
So there was a much deeper layer for you, something that triggered that sense of, okay, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to change now. But isn't it ironic that so often in the health industry, it's kind of focused on surface level solutions. So it's about the next program or product or quick fix, where that's not necessarily always the solution. So what do you think of that approach and how crucial it is when someone is trying to lose weight to find that why or to look at the deeper layers of what's really going on for them?
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's about, yeah, 2 or 3 hours in itself. I think the industry around weight loss, health, well-being, and the kind of commercial interests of that, I think, it makes me really angry because I think we're sold so much crap. And I think, you're in a vulnerable place and you want with all your heart to believe that this next thing that you're doing is the thing that's going to make all the difference. And, you wake, yeah, why haven't I found this before? And, the whole kind of motivation that comes with thinking you found the solution. It's just, and it makes me so angry. And I think there's so much sort of conflicting information out there that everybody can't help, not everybody, but a lot of people can't help but feel like they're failing. Like, it's me, it must be about me, it must be that I'm doing something wrong. And genuinely, it's not. It's not a lack of willpower. It's not the calories in, calories out. There's so much crap out there that people genuinely don't know where to start. And going to bed at the same time and waking up every day at the same time, like nobody's monetized that yet. And eating whole food and thinking about things that serve you in a kind and compassionate way, you know that hasn't been packaged yet. And I think the ability to be able to commercialize the fundamentals of health is at this moment in time eluding us. And looking at, obviously Weight Watchers has now gone into administration, and I think Jenny Craig has too. There's some of these, weight loss companies that have been selling products because actually what they've been selling for years and years and years hasn't worked. So they've now had to move into these sort of commercial streams of selling products. I think it comes down to the fundamentals of health, movement, sleep, good food, being kind to yourself, and surrounding yourself with people that fill you up. Looking at what your community is and enriching your community in whatever shape that is. So I think there is a lot. I think the food industry and the diet industry particularly have a huge amount to answer for because it causes so much confusion for so many.
Exactly. You've mentioned kindness and compassion. If I think about the health industry and sometimes, what people believe they need in order to lose weight, it's often that they think they just need the next program or the product or whatever, like you've mentioned. And sometimes with that, almost a sense of being strict with themselves or harsh with themselves in order to lose that weight. It's almost like a punishment. And the fact that you haven't lost that weight yet is because you're doing something wrong, as you've explained. But now you've mentioned kindness and compassion. Why do you think that kindness is often so underestimated in this process?
I think it's where Mary Mary Walker and I really really connected because I think the way that she talks about self-compassion
Mm.
I mean, I mean, she's got such a beautiful voice and such a beautiful heart, and soul. And when she talks about compassion and kindness, I can feel it. It's just so beautiful. But I think we are all so hard on ourselves, and that voice, we've all got it. That inner critic of, whatever your inner critic says, whether it's, you're not smart enough, or you're not enough, or you're not whatever, not lovable, not. If we can start from a place where we are able to begin to like ourselves and love ourselves, and find some compassion for ourselves where we're at, that is a great starting point for change. Because I look at myself over the years, and I've tried to hate myself into change, being disgusted with myself and ashamed of myself. What basis is that? And would we want that for our children or our dearest friends or our family? I don't think there's very many people who would. And I think that sense of, I've actually, a couple of people have after I've spoken to them with regard to my journey, I've made mention of finding the capacity for change. And
Mm.
I think, it's another layer, a layer on. I must do more. I must do more. I've got to do more of this and more of this and more of this and more here and more there. And we're the expectations we have of, being able to do more of everything. And that means, sleeping less and rushing more and working more, and, probably more convenience food, because actually we've left no time to prepare anything. Less sleep, less this, less that. The equal and opposite reaction. Every time you've got more of something, you've got less of something else. And we drive ourselves, I think, to being with no capacity at all. We've got nothing left, particularly with technology now. We're working right up until our eyes close. And sleep is something that we'll get to at some point in the future. So I think that whole sense of just slowing everything down as much as you can, really being mindful and conscious of what we choose to spend our time on, and being a little bit kinder to ourselves, creating a little bit more capacity for change, and then building in it consciously the things that we know will serve us, rather than sort of numbing with busyness in some senses, where we're not addressing some of the key fundamentals. Because life does get so busy that actually you begin to lose track of the things that you know serve you, because it just becomes a sort of tick box exercise of getting all of these things done,
Mm.
and sometimes being seen to get them done, but really without having any depth and meaning to the reasons why.
What were some of these things that served you on the journey? You mentioned earlier the fundamentals of health, the things that can't be monetized. It's completely free in many cases. So what were the things that specifically served you, the changes that you made throughout this journey?
Do you know what? I think and this was really one of the things that was quite profound for me in writing the presentation, because as much as I've exercised a lot over the years, and I've run a marathon, or I've run a half marathon, or I've set myself different challenges over the years, doing different things, whether it's Orange Theory or HIT, or some extreme something or other. um, when it came to really kind of the beginning of the change this time around, it wasn't about any of those kind of headline changes. It was actually just doing things in a much, much slower way. So it was, walking every day. It was going to bed and waking up at the same time. It was getting up before my kids. So my alarm does, go off at 5 something. And some days that's jumping straight on the Peloton or into the cold plunge, or it's yoga, or it's Pilates, or it's my vibration plate, or it's to the gym, or, whatever. There's something that I do first thing in the morning every day. So it's building in small, sustainable changes and building on them. So it's one little thing at a time that builds consistency, that then builds habits, that then, for me, help me see the sustainable changes. And it was on those walks, listening to podcasts and beginning to understand why getting up at that time every day and going to bed at that time every night helped. And my journey with alcohol as well, I've had so many rules around it. I wouldn't say I've ever had a significant problem with alcohol, but certainly it didn't serve me.
Mm.
And I think the phrase is that sort of middle lane drinker. So, it'd be a couple of glasses of wine most evenings. But that impacts my sleep. And every once in a while it would be more than that, and then that would impact my whole weekend. And I think, I then went through stages of I'm only going to, I'm going to have an alcohol-free day, 3 times a week, or I'm going to, I'll drink on a Thursday and a Saturday, but not a Friday and a Sunday, or whatever it might be. And I just had all these different rules around it. And slowly but surely, alcohol, now it's about 3 years. I've had the odd glass here and there in that time, but really, really haven't drunk. That's massively helped me. Knowing that I need 7 to 8 hours sleep a night has really, really helped, or at least that opportunity for that. So getting into bed by about 10 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock, and getting up at sort of 5:15, 5:30, something like that. That really served me. Really thinking about the times that I'd want to eat. I never felt particularly hungry in the morning, but I would have breakfast, whereas now that's a cup of coffee and I'll eat at about 11. So I think it's been trial and error with different things. I think it's been reading and listening so I understand why what I'm doing is working. So having that kind of education piece as well as the trial and error of what I'm actually doing. And that combination has been really, really helpful. Because there is that, I know why I'm doing it. I'm not just doing it because I read about it in the paper.
Yeah.
I'm doing it because there's actually science behind it.
It's extremely powerful to have a bit of an understanding of how certain things impact us. And that's why we don't want to necessarily, use it in a way that's not going to serve us. But it's very interesting how you've explained how one or two habits really had a profound ripple effect on the rest of your life, on your sleep, on how you show up the next day for work, how productive you are, how you show up for the people around you. But you've mentioned a bit earlier, you didn't go into lots of detail, but you did mention that you do have a bit of a tendency to go to extremes. So tell us more about that. Did you ever find yourself navigating new extremes?
Oh, completely. And I think, yeah, I mean, I still do now.
Yeah.
I don't know that part of me will ever go. I think I am more aware now, and I think as my children have got older, I think your kids they hold up a mirror to you, and if I have been, absent, or not, or not, I was going to say not around as much as they would like, then they will let you know that if I've overcommitted myself to time away, or one example immediately comes to mind is that I'd run for my children's school. I was on the PTA, and my dear friend and I chaired the PTA for a long period of time. And obviously, a big part of what a PTA does is fundraise for the school. And as part of, I sort of got a bit healthier, and I was back running again. And I had already done a marathon, and I'd done a half marathon, and this friend of mine had done the same. Not that we'd done it together. And so she said, "Why don't we do some sort of sporting challenge?" And it was in 2018, I think. And I had, I was probably at about, I don't know, maybe 90 kilos, something like that. So I was significantly heavier than I am now, but a lot lighter than I had been. And I was sort of on the journey. And I thought this will be great. This will really kind of push me into the next sphere of health and wellness. And so we came up with this ultra marathon to run from London to Brighton. In under 24 hours. And I mean, the training was brutal. It was the marathon itself, the ultra was in May. And so the training was all the way through the winter. And they were long runs, it was 5-6 hours at a time. And so we were sort of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go out and do our training plan. And it was cold and wet and sleet. And I mean, it was just, there were times where it was genuinely miserable. And I look back on it now, and I mean, God, has it cemented our friendship forever, because we found ourselves in so many hideous but funny now with reflection situations. But I did that. And then it was, that was a lot. That was a lot. Working full time, children, mum. And at the end of it, my daughter said to me, "Mummy, please don't do anything like that again." And it really, there were back-to-back marathons. It was really hardcore. And then my husband wanted to do one, so we did something similar a couple of years on. It was 250s. So I was training on a Saturday, he was training on a Sunday, and again, that was a real impact on the kids. So I think there are, again, as I said earlier, I think it's the light and the dark. I think the wonderful thing about doing something like that was setting myself a challenge, really pushing myself out of my comfort zone, realizing by doing it that I could do something hard. But then, the negative side of that is my kids are only little for a certain amount of time. And actually that, 6-month period, I spent a lot of time away from them. Yeah. But it is, I think it's navigating the course between those dark and light sides in a way that, there's you're conscious of it, I guess. I wouldn't be where I am now or doing what I do now if I didn't embrace, I think, both sides of my personality. And I think what I hope that I've got better at as I've got older is recognizing the times where actually, okay, taken on too much, what are the things that can go, and surrounded myself with people that will kindly course correct and support me in that. And I think, if I look at my food, because I'd spent so many years restricting and depriving and overindulging, that I then learned so much about it, and ultimately gone on and done nutrition courses and things that I think I've probably gone from the really annoying person, eating too much, to then being a really annoying person, restricting what I would be eating and what everyone else should be eating, and telling, my next, font of knowledge, or my next chapter in my font of knowledge, or whatever the right way of describing it is. and then finding some sort of peace around it all. Like, everybody's journey is different. Just because this is working for me doesn't mean it's the same for everybody else. But definitely a bit of sort of ping ponging around with, right, it's this way, or no, it's this way, or I'm going to do it like this.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, yeah, there's been learning along the way, and that dark and light side is absolutely still there.
What I like about it is that you're not demonizing that part of you. You're not saying, oh, I wish I didn't have this part, or that, it could be different. It's part of who you are, and you're aware of it, you're acknowledging it, and it even seems like you can hold it with that compassion and kindness. It's like, yes, I'm conscious of it. And sometimes my kids help me to remind me again that I'm going into an extreme, but it's part of your journey, and you've learned to embrace it, but also be cautious of it. So it's not like we're going to sort everything out as we go along and check. You have all those check boxes. Okay, I don't have extreme parts anymore, or I don't do that anymore. It's sometimes something that we take with us for the rest of our lives.
Oh, 100%. And I think actually one of the things, obviously now having done the HCA course and done my case studies and worked with my case studies, a lot of whom have lived with a lot of weight, is really hearing the tone of voice and the content of what they're saying when they're being unkind to themselves or not acknowledging how far they've come. I think we have these that's this strictness around how we live our lives, where we feel like we're letting each other down, or we're letting ourselves down, or we're letting people down around us if some little thing goes wrong, and we perceive it to be, I failed. I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm doing it. That is all part of life, isn't it? And we're learning as we go, and we, I think, forget to celebrate how far we've come in a
Yeah.
journey,
Yeah,
but we just concentrate on the one thing that's gone wrong that week rather than the plethora of things that have gone right.
exactly.
Um, and so I think, yeah, sharing a little bit of my journey in there makes that sense of relatability, and I can see and feel what they're saying because I've truly lived that.
Mm. It seems like there's been quite a bit of learning for you in training as a health coach. So, if you think about how a coach might have supported you through all of this, what do you think, what role could a coach have played throughout your journey?
Do you know what I mean? I think I've got as you say that, I've got an absolute clear memory of me sitting on my bed in our one before or two before houses, um, in floods of tears, thinking about what 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 help do I need, and what came up for me while I was sitting on the bed, um, thinking about where I was at that point, and it was just after Mum had been diagnosed, and I had this moment of, what do I need? What support do I need? And when I had been living in America, in Australia, I was leaving a business that I had started, and my partner and I brought in a coach to help us navigate the selling of the business. And he brought a sort of small tribe, as he called them, of people together that we could tap into for all of the different questions that we might have about the process that we were going through. And that's the approach that I took at the time. And while I wasn't aware at that point in my life about health coaching, I did work with a coach at work. And ultimately, that has led to me doing the HCA course, because I think having that accountability partner in the journey is so immensely powerful. And having that cheerleader And I think even now, and I'm still working in my full-time role at this moment, thinking about what I might do with the coaching in years to come. That whole sense of being a cheerleader for somebody and being able to be there and be alongside them is so powerful. And having somebody that you know genuinely cares about you and the outcomes of your journey, it's huge. It's huge. And I think, talking to all of the lovely health coaches that I now have the pleasure of calling my friends, and what is their why in becoming a health coach is just, and the impacts that they're having and the impact of health coaching. I just read a paper from McKinsey, and I read a paper last week from PwC, and I read a paper, the World Economic Forum, and just, the power that health coaching has to really truly impact the health of the population here is immense. And I feel so lucky and proud to be a part of this movement that is going to have such an incredible impact on health. I work with a fantastic health coach, and it is, I think that tribe, surrounding yourself with people that have a like-minded interest. I now meet up with, other people that are on that health mastermind. I meet up with my health coach buddies. The graduation a couple of weeks ago, I mean, honestly, a highlight of my year. The
Mm.
energy there was just phenomenal. I was
Mm.
so excited to be part of it. And it was so wonderful to go back into that room and see all of those, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and to really feel that energy. So I think health coaching is just, I'm phenomenal.
And with coaching, we really look at the bigger picture, and that's really what was needed, I guess. It's not just about, all right, let's think about how we're going to bring that number down on the scale. It's looking at the bigger picture and seeing, but what areas, or what's your why? What are the areas that we really need to focus on, in order to move you forward? So you've mentioned that you're still thinking about how exactly you're going to use your health coaching certification, but what are the kind of work or support that you are drawn to, where you maybe feel called to contribute?
Where I've gone, yeah, quite deep now is into the sort of weight loss landscape with regard to GLP-1s, the skinny jabs, and it's been really interesting. Just sharing my story and a lot of the questions that I've been asked. Well, one, people now make the assumption that I've been on the skinny jab, which to date I haven't. But I think it is. I'm not. For or against. I think they absolutely are having an incredible impact. I think if I had been the weight that I was in the environment we're now in, would I have taken them? Yeah, because I've done everything else. I'm not sitting on a high horse saying, it must be done a certain way. I think everyone needs to start their journey and start from where they're at. And there's a place for them, and I think they're having an incredible impact. There's obviously downsides too, and absolutely out of my scope of practice, but seeing I think combined potentially with some behavior change coaching and that muscle centric approach to exercise, if used for the short term, maybe there's a place for them. There's quite a few doctors now, I think, who are looking at it from a microdosing perspective because of the impact on reducing inflammation and balancing blood sugar. They're obviously designed initially for diabetes. So I think it's interesting. So I'm actually writing a little ebook. Um, Part of what I've done in Level Up is done interviews with quite a number of people that are taking GLP-1s. And I've sort of become a little bit of a go-to for friends who are taking it, or friends of friends that are taking it, who I can just share a little bit of my experience from talking to lots of other people, because I think people don't want to necessarily talk about it. I think people are quite quiet about it. And it isn't so much, I think, about going on to them, it's how people feel about coming off them. And I think there is a little stigma in, oh, you've used them. But I think it's very interesting. The weight loss landscape has changed fundamentally with them.
Yes.
So I think it's interesting and timely. And I think, having, being able to think about where I've come from and my journey with weight loss and the things that, it isn't just about the number on the scale, it's about vibrant health. And I think, quick fixes have, there's I've had concerns with some of those quick fixes over the years. So I think, it's looking at things in a really holistic way.
No, it's definitely a really interesting area to look into, look at the research, look at the options and opportunities around it. If someone listening today wants to reach out, if they want to learn more, what's the best way to connect with you?
I think LinkedIn for now is the best way of getting in touch with me, and then let's watch this space and we'll see what comes next.
Absolutely. So I know we've touched on quite a few things today, but is there maybe one last thing that you want to mention, or maybe a final thought or message that you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think the ability to be kind and compassionate, thinking about genuinely where you are today and what are the things that are going to make the difference in your life. And I honestly believe that starting every day, sitting for even just 5 minutes in complete silence, I think our bodies, our minds, our subconscious, it's so smart. It's so wise. And I think we give it very little opportunity to surface and to look in and to feel in and to listen in. So I think for me that probably is the place to start, is with kindness and compassion, hand on heart, and 5 minutes of silence every day.
Kindness and compassion, but also making space, creating capacity for you to make the changes. Victoria, thank you so much for sharing your story with such honesty and authenticity and vulnerability. You've really given us a lot to think about, not just when it comes to health and habits, but also when it comes to identity and purpose and how we care for ourselves and others. And I know that your journey will definitely deeply resonate with many of our listeners today. So thank you very much for joining us.
Well, bless you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you. And thank you so much. And thank you to HCA. I just think absolutely such an incredibly special community of amazing people. And I feel such a privilege to be a tiny part of that. So thank you, Zena.
Thank you so much. And thank you for our listeners for joining us today. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with friends or family who might find it inspiring. And if you'd like more insights like this sent directly to your inbox, make sure to sign up for our fortnightly HCA Talks Health newsletter. We've popped the link in the show notes. See you next time.